I ask that everyone please silence their phone or turn them off. Okay. Good morning. It's 6 p.m. I'm calling to order the Gearhart Planning Commission, April 20, 2023. I'm looking, is Judy and John there? Yes. Okay, so all commissioners are present. Angelina is here, Chad is here, Peter is here, and Garrett is here for staff. Before we start the meeting, I want you all to know this meeting is not only recorded here on a recording, but for those people on Zoom, the meeting is also recorded. If you do not want to be seen, you can turn off your video. Also, if you want to speak, we ask you to turn on your video so we can see who is speaking. Also on Zoom, you will be muted.
Break one.
Except, will he be muted?
They will be.
You're muted. That is important for this meeting because when you speak, we hear you in here and it garbles the minutes. And it's important that Angelina gets the minutes correct and accurate.
Break two.
The count is 2.
And when you are speaking, if you choose to speak, please speak clearly and slowly because we have to record it. Okay, so I just wanted to get that out of the way. I called you to order. We have a consent agenda. Are there any additions or corrections, or do I have a motion to accept this as presented?
So moved.
Terry has moved. Do I have a second?
Second.
And Russ has seconded the motion. All those in favor of the approving the consent agenda, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say no. Okay, there's nothing there. Reports. Staff, do you have anything for us, Chad?
Just two quick things, Madam President and Commission. Code enforcement, things seem to be going okay. No complaints, short-term vacation rental. Staff administration, we've had our police officer interviews yesterday. We had some good candidates there. And then second week in May, we'll be interviewing 3 candidates for police chief. We had a total of 10 people apply. So it was a pretty good turnout, especially in today's day. The other thing I wanted to report on, just really quickly, is a project that Sharon and I are working on. Sharon approached and wanted to talk to the city about planting some more trees around town for the beautification process. And so we approached city council and they are interested in this project, but they wanted to get some feedback from this. So what Sharon and I thought we would do is we would bring a plan to you folks during the next city council or the planning commission meeting, show you what it is that we're thinking, talking about what we have kind of determined costs and caring for these things in locations, and then figure out a way to get some public feedback for that meeting as well, so we can start making some decisions then on where we can begin planting some more trees, as we are losing them on a daily basis as well. So that was a project that we're working with you. That'll be on agenda for next month. And we should have things ready to go by then. Anything that you wanted to add, Mr. Chairman?
No.
Okay.
Anything from you, Angelina? No. Okay, commissioners, do you have anything? No. I'd like to acknowledge that Dawn has did a very nice job on our summary of the comprehensive plan. We received some nice letters and saying it was very nicely done. So thank you, Dawn, for your work on that.
Thank you.
Okay, we have the goals list. Is there any additions, corrections, concerns? We'll think about it next month. Nothing?
No.
Okay, I'm sorry to John and Judy, I forget that you are there, so speak up, please. I apologize ahead of time because I'm going to forget you are there. Okay, good. Goals list, visitors' comments. Do any visitors have anything that they'd like to share with us tonight that does not have to do with an agenda item? Are you looking? Mr. Zoom over there, you've got a. Got a lot over there. Don't see anything. Okay, all right. All right. We're on to public hearings. I am going to open the public hearing. Public hearing is on file 23-3.ZMA. Zone change request submitted by Scopey Gearhart LLC located at 1002 Pacific Way and further described as Assessor's Plot 6.10.NBA, tax lot 800 and 1500. Said request is to change the zone from public and semi-public P/SP section 3.8 public and semi-public zone to medium density residential R2 section 3.2 medium residential zone R2 in order to develop and use the subject property for a single family dwelling and as allowed in the R2 zone. I will read, for those of you who have not been to planning commission before, I will read a disclosure statement I'm required to read. Then after that, the applicant, Garrett Phelps will make the presentation. Then so we'll have the staff report. Then the applicant will have their say. And after that, the proponents will be able to speak and opponents will be able to speak. And those people that just would like to talk called neutral comments. At that time, the applicant will have a rebuttal. And then I will either continue or close public hearing depending on what is decided. At that point, the commissioners will discuss it. During that time, if the commissioners choose to either have questions for Garrett, we do that, or if we have questions for the applicant, we will do that at that time. Okay, so I'll read the disclosure statement. All persons testifying shall be deemed parties to the application and must provide their name and full mailing address if they wish to be notified of the decision, continuances, appeals, or other procedural actions required by the code. The city zoning code specifies applicable criteria to be relied upon in making a decision. Those criteria and findings of fact are in the city staff report. Public testimony should be limited to those criteria and findings of fact or to other city or state land use standards that the person testifying believes apply to the proposed land use action. Failure to raise an issue in person or in writing with sufficient detail to afford the hearing body and parties to the hearing an opportunity to respond to that issue precludes appeal to the city council or land use board of appeals or to seek damages in circuit court due to a condition of approval. Before the conclusion of the initial evidentiary hearing, any participant may ask the planning commission for an opportunity to present additional relevant evidence, arguments, or testimony that is within the scope of the hearing. The hearing shall grant the request by scheduling a date to finish the hearing, a continuance to a time and date certain, or by leaving the record open for additional evidence, argument, or testimony pursuant to ORS 197.763(6)A through E. Commissioners, do you have any conflict of interest, ex parte contact, or personal bias?
No.
Yes, Sharon.
I've asked questions of several staff people. I have had citizens make comments to me. I've called you to ask you a question, procedural question.
Okay.
And I would believe that we have probably all driven by the property. At least. So we have in a sense visited the property and so we are familiar with the property. Audience, are there any challenges to the commission's ability to make an impartial decision? Okay, you just need to kind of get when I ask questions.
I'll catch up here quickly.
Okay, catch up. All right, so Garrett, it is your chance to give us the staff report.
Thank you. All right, I'm going to give you all a brief overview of the staff report. And then I definitely anticipate answering more questions about it when the time comes for that. But I know we have a lot of people who want to speak, and you have plenty of deliberating to do. So this will be brief. So my name is Garrett Phillips. I'm the city planner for the city of Gearhart. And the staff report that we prepared was posted online a week ago, and it's still there available for anyone to review. With that being said, I'll actually present some of the contents of the staff report. So again, this is for a rezoning of nearly 8.5 acres at 1002 Pacific Way from public and semi-public to R2 medium density residential zoning. Currently there's 2 lots that comprise the property that are split, you might say, by the center of the old Lincoln Avenue right of way. So this rezoning would essentially create two lots that would then be available for residential development going forward in the future. The review criteria that are outlined in the staff report are primarily from the use zone. So there's criteria related to what's allowed in the R2 zone, for example. We don't want to rezone a property to R2 if the lot sizes that are allowed in the R2 zone aren't consistent with what's already there. We don't want to create inconsistencies right off the bat. There's also overlay zones like the wetland overlay zone and the flood hazard overlay zone. And then the staff report primarily focuses on Article 11 and the 5 criteria for granting zoning map amendments. And those are inclusive of all of the relevant policies from the comprehensive plan. So again, this is a rezoning for 2 lots, and there's an old vacated right-of-way on the property, the old school building. There's wetlands, there's a floodplain, and there's a utility maintenance access easement that is used to ensure that the city has the ability to maintain an 8-inch sewer main or a water main that runs through the property, and to access a fire hydrant that's also near the northern property boundary. Surrounding uses, for example, to the east and southeast are primarily commercial, and the zoning for those properties is also commercial. And then to the northwest and southwest, the uses are residential, basically single family residential, and the zoning on those properties would support basically a continuation of that single family residential pattern. So offering a preview of the conclusion of the staff report. The staff report concludes with a recommendation that the Planning Commission recommend to City Council that the zoning change is approved with conditions. So there's an important point there, and that's that the decision for this rezone actually lies with City Council, and the Planning Commission is going to make a recommendation to them. Based on the deliberations and the hearing, we'll write a new report that documents the Planning Commission's findings, and presents a rational argument in support of the city council's decision that they're going to have to make. So a few basic conditions that many of the findings in the staff report rely on are, again, that there's 2 existing lots, and that in the R2 zone, single family homes, duplexes, triplexes, and fourplexes are the primary types of dwellings that are allowed there. And so without further subdivision that would require additional city approvals, we could imagine, upon rezoning the property, that there could be a total of up to 8 dwelling units. Basically, a fourplex on each lot seems to be the maximum number of dwellings that could be allowed without further subdivision approvals, partition approvals, or some kind of other discretionary decision that the city would have to make. That being said, R2 zoning would support, based on the applicant's analysis, up to an additional about 30 dwelling units on the property, based on the idea that up to 6 dwelling units per net buildable acre could be allowed. And so many of the findings are based on the idea that a total of 30 dwelling units could be allowed, and that only 8 dwelling units could be allowed without the city having another chance to require things like a traffic impact analysis through the subdivision process. When it comes to wetlands and floodplains, there is buildable area on both of the properties outside of wetlands and floodplains. And the school building that's proposed for residential use is also outside of those areas. In regards to the tsunami hazard inundation zone, this is in an area that would be potentially inundated by a small tsunami, and the city has specific regulations allowing residential development in the small tsunami hazard inundation area, up to 10 dwelling units per acre. So 10 dwelling units per acre is more than what's allowed in the R2 zone. So given that the city has some specific regulations there, and that by definition the R2 zone would limit residential density even more, the proposal is consistent with that overlay. Transportation impacts, transportation impact analyses. Again, so that the city can require a transportation impact analysis when the applicant or a future owner proposes a subdivision or another development. And a recommended condition of approval is that the city do just that upon the first time that the applicant or another owner applies for one of those things. There's a variety of other triggers that the city could use to require a TIA traffic impact analysis going forward. So given that the applicant's proposing 1 dwelling right off the bat, and there's a maximum of 8 that we think could be allowed without a subdivision, we didn't think that a traffic impact analysis would be needed. There's a bicycle and pedestrian improvement project that's identified in our transportation system plan along Pacific Way. The zoning code requires that new development contribute a proportional fair share towards planned street improvements like that. And so we've recommended as a condition of approval that the applicant file a waiver of remonstrance on their deed to ensure that in the future, when this project is built, the city can recuperate a fair share of costs from whoever the owner is at that time. So getting into some of the public comments, I'm going to give you some broad themes here. All of the public comments that I reviewed, and I reviewed all of them, did seem to be in opposition to the project. There's a variety of staff comments, some of which we rely on to make our findings, particularly ones supporting the idea that public facilities and public services are adequate to serve the proposal. And also, we relied on those in crafting some of the conditions. So you'll see some conditions that refer back to staff comments or that are based on staff comments. Ultimately, none of those comments indicated that public services and infrastructure cannot handle the proposed development. So the 5 comprehensive plan criteria are reviewed in the staff report, and the staff report found that the proposal would be consistent with all of them, that the amendment is consistent with the comprehensive plan, that the amendment meets a land use need, that the uses permitted by the amendment are compatible with the development pattern in the surrounding area. The land is physically suitable for the proposal, and that public facilities and services are adequate to accommodate the proposed uses. The conditions of approval that staff are recommending relate to requiring that the DEQ and Clatsop County health assessments of septic capacity be completed prior to issuing any permits for building or subdivision or anything that could require use of a septic system. That a transportation impact analysis be completed when a subdivision or partition is proposed. There's a condition related to removing fencing that may not be compliant with the zoning code. The 4th condition is especially notable. Staff had recommended dedicating the Lincoln Avenue right-of-way back to the city to ensure that the city could provide adequate fire service to the subject property that's being rezoned and the neighborhood to the north. This was based on staff comments, essentially laying out an argument on why unrestricted access to that fire hydrant was needed to serve the neighborhood to the north, but also the subject property. And the applicant submitted information on April 18th, laying out sound reasons why that dedication would not be needed, and an alternative way of ensuring that fire service can be adequately provided. And so we're basically recommending a modified condition number 4, that the applicant install gates and lock boxes that are consistent with the Oregon Fire Code on the gates that access the property there. And finally, based on a staff recommendation, a drainage and stormwater plan will be required. So before I finish, I just wanted to reiterate some of the options that the Planning Commission has for the end of the meeting. Again, it's recommending that the City Council approve the proposal with conditions. They could be different conditions than staff have recommended, and there could be different findings still in support of approval. Or it could be the ones that are in the staff report. The Planning Commission can recommend denial of the request based on other findings than those that were in the staff report. Or the hearing could be continued, or the record could be left open for additional evidence. And I'm happy to answer questions about the staff report and explain the reasoning behind the findings there. I'm also happy and looking forward to helping the Planning Commission create the findings and conclusions that it thinks are most appropriate to forward to the City Council. So that'll be all from me for now. Thank you.
Does anyone have questions for Gearhart? No, only commissioners, I'm sorry. Danny?
I have a question. How can it be good planning when you're asking the planning commission to approve zoning when we know so little about the project? I mean, I could list 10 things. We don't know about the septic. The testing hasn't been done. We don't have the reports. We don't have the wetlands report. We don't have the scale of the project. We don't have the scope of the project. We don't know how it fits into the neighborhood. And you're asking us to approve when we don't have any answers to these things. And what the people are writing letters, they want to know what this is going to be. It's like going on a blind date. We don't know what's going to show up. How can you tell me? It's almost like you designed a plot in a cornfield in Kansas. It's just a cookie cutter. You have no concept about a comprehensive plan, what goes on in Gearhart, how Gearhart works. How can that be good planning?
So I'll do my best to answer the question. It's broad enough that I'd say that the staff report I think lays out sound reasons for approving the proposal. There's also a reason that decisions that rely on a lot of judgment are not made by staff. So there's judgment involved in this decision and in terms of interpreting the zoning code, interpreting the comprehensive plan. And that's ultimately yours and the city council's judgment to make. If generally speaking, if you ask me questions about the staff report and why I wrote it in a certain way, I'll do my best to explain the reasoning behind it. But that also won't necessarily help you make an alternate finding if you think that it just doesn't, if you think that it's not applicable or doesn't fit with your viewpoint. So generally speaking, I appreciate the question. You're asking if how can we recommend approval of a proposal that has so little information? And again, in the staff report goes through the different mechanisms that are available to ensure as development proposals come in that are more specific, as subdivision or partition proposals come in, there's mechanisms in the subdivision ordinance and the zoning ordinance that will allow the city to ensure that development that occurs there will be consistent with the code and the plan.
And I can piggyback on that, Garrett. So I've read through the application. I've read through the comments. Just to center us, this is a quasi-judicial land use decision, which means that you're essentially sitting as judges. You're weighing the evidence that you have. To the extent there's contrary evidence or disagreement, or what I would ask is that you find, or if you find one argument more compelling than another, that you identify that, because the city council is relying on you and your judgment in order to help them identify issues so that they can make a decision based on the record. As far as why can't the city, or why wouldn't the city require an applicant to submit this report or that report? The short answer is that we can't. The statute is ORS 227.178 for those that like to check on what I say at home. And what it basically says is that we can ask the applicant for things. They can submit what they submit. At that point, we do a completeness letter. And then they have where we request other reports. And they have three choices. One, they can give us all of what we've asked for. Secondly, they can give us part of what they've asked for, part of what we've asked for. And the third is they could say, we stand on this. And from that time, we have to process the application. We're on a clock. So if the 120 days expires, then the application is approved. So understand that there's some land use decisions that we can or can't make, but there's some that has to come to a conclusion. And so again, I think that there's a lot of public testimony, and to the extent that you find some of it more compelling than others, to the extent that you find expert testimony informative, that you flag that, particularly if there's contradictory testimony, which is often the case and is certainly the case in this matter.
Okay. So does anyone have a question for Peter or for Garrett here? You've asked your question, Carrie, you're okay. Do John or Judy have any questions? I can't see them, so I don't know.
I do have one question.
Okay,
It's probably for Peter, but I'm not certain. It could be for Garrett as well. This concept that if approved, if we approve the R2 designation, that there are still barriers, if you will, that either us or other bodies as part of the city management could restrict development. Do those include architectural reviews? The final layout of the property? Does that have to come back at some point and get approved in a separate manner?
As far as like the aesthetics of the place, no, we don't have a, that's not something that would come back. Once the zoning is zoned, once whatever the end zoning is, at that point, there's certain things that they would be able to do by right. And then there are other things that, they would need to get approval for. But yeah, the short answer is it is very likely that the end projects would come back to the city council. And then the question of what could you require them to do, what sort of exactions could you do, that goes back to the Nolan and Dolan tests. Nolan being that there has to be a nexus between what you're asking for and what they want to do. And the Dolan test being that the exactions that we ask for have to be roughly proportionate to the benefit that is received. So the letter that we got from the applicant is an example of a Dolan issue where they said the mere fact of a rezone, we don't believe that it's enough to trigger rededication of that vacated road. And so that position helped inform us staff in our recommendation that that requirement be changed to specifically the easement area only for the utility easement.
So one quick follow-up. You said at the very beginning of your response that we have no mechanism in our city charter, our guidelines to have any impact on the aesthetics of the development. Is that correct?
Yeah, we don't and Garrett, correct me if I'm misstating this, but there are zones of the city that are more rigorous than others. And the R2 zone, like if you wanted to require them to do like a mid-century modern look, we wouldn't be able to do that. So as far as the minimum lot sizes, things of that nature, the type of dwellings, single, duplex, triplex, fourplex, yeah, there's some ability to control through that. But as far as we want 60% of the front glazed, or we want, height, yeah, there are height limits, there are things like that. But as far as purely aesthetics, we don't have a lot.
Okay, thank you.
Danny, I have one more question. With the
Yes, go
planner.
ahead.
For the planner, Garrett, Matt Brown, the former mayor, submitted a document dated April 18th. You said that you reviewed all the documents that were received. Did you review Matt's analysis?
I will have to look and see if I reviewed his in particular.
Because Matt, and he was a former mayor, and he walked through item by item, listing findings on each item in a comprehensive plan of zoning, essentially doing the same thing that you did. So my question to you, and I assume you read it because you said you did, do you have any problem with any of his findings? And if you do, what are those problems?
So I haven't made responses or findings in response to each of the public comments. I am trying to look up his comment right now to try to respond to your question.
It was towards the very end of the packet. is my recollection.
Page 111 of the big one
Okay.
begins.
I'd like you to respond to each of his items and tell us if they're correct or incorrect. Because these findings support denial of the application.
Gary, it's Chad Sweet here. We just forwarded that to you again. It is in your packet. There it is. We talked about.
Get an answer? Okay, I didn't think you got an answer, right?
Page 111. From Matt Brown.
Yes.
Okay.
Did you review that?
Sorry, I just lost my page. Yes, I read this one.
Okay.
So
Do you have any problem with the findings he's written?
well, they're you want me to, excuse me, would you like me to make arguments against these findings that are consistent with my staff report? So the city will maintain, let's see here, I'll start with article, let's see, section 11.040 amendment criteria. Before an amendment to the text of the zoning ordinance is approved, findings will be made that it is consistent with the policies of the comprehensive plan, and there is a public need for the proposed amendment. I wrote findings specifically related to those criteria. And let's see some of Mr. Brown's arguments.
Then skip down to number 3, the city will maintain the present residential density. And then he writes a finding.
Okay, yeah, I'm looking for the actual findings here that he was writing. Okay, the applicant cannot use the alleged desired before. Okay, so none of the staff report findings or the approval criteria require that the proposal supply affordable workforce housing. So it's not required. You're not required to do that to obtain a rezoning approval.
Well, that's not telling me your response to his finding that he wrote.
There is a public land use need for open space and park zoning as basically the conclusion. Is that what you'd like me to respond to? I'll assume so. So we reviewed the Parks and Recreation System master plan, and this property was not identified as needed to serve a park or open space role. if if an applicant wants to request rezoning to parks and open space, I would write a staff report with findings on whether or not the zoning code and comprehensive plan supports that decision. But it's a whole nother application that would have to be made. And it deserves the amount of attention that would go into a full staff report. And the decision before us is whether to rezone to R2. And so that's, what we've invested our time and effort in informing that decision.
Well, I guess I don't understand what you're telling me.
Well,
You're
so,
not telling me if you disagree with this finding or not.
okay, so I'm trying to see if he writes a finding about whether or not there's a land use need for R2. The applicant completed an analysis and a summary of established planning documents that have been completed in the last several years in the county and for the city of Gearhart that established that there is a need for additional housing, both in the region and in the city, including housing that is permitted in the R2 zone and that's not permitted in the R1 zone. I think the finding that there's a land use need for the kinds of uses permitted in the R2 zone is sound. If you all are concerned about whether or not that housing and anything other than a very large single family home would ultimately get built, I think, that would be an interesting conversation to have. How much of a land use need that would actually satisfy.
I think
But
that would be a very interesting conversation, and isn't that a conversation that should take place?
His audio's gone.
Gary, yeah, you're there.
yeah, so yeah, please have that conversation. I'll remind you, I'm listening and prepared to write a report that reflects the findings and conclusion that you make. Once I've completed the staff report, which I've done, I'm now here to serve you all in presenting your recommendation to City Council.
Well, it's probably counterproductive to go through each and every one of these because I don't think you're that familiar with them. And I don't think you'd be able to tell me whether you agree or disagree and why you do. Is that a fair statement?
No, I can. It would just take a fair amount of time. It's a lot of attention to give to one comment, but I'm here to serve. So.
Okay, why don't we go on with our meeting? You review this stuff, and then maybe a little bit later after you've reviewed it, you can answer some of our questions.
All right.
Jenny, I have a question. Sure. Garrett. The P/SP zone, public, semi-public is no longer applicable because the property is no longer used in that capacity, correct? And that automatically triggers a rezone.
No, a right to rezone.
You're right to rezone.
A right to rezone.
It says then they shall automatically be eligible for reclassification into another district. That is the.
Okay.
So the way I read that, any property is eligible for rezoning if the rezoning is consistent with the zoning code and the comprehensive plan. And so is this one. The fact that language is specifically placed there regarding a transfer of ownership from public to private on property zone PSP just suggests to me that there's some extra obligation with, for the city to facilitate some kind of solution in terms of facilitating a rezone that's appropriate for private ownership and private use.
So if tonight, for example, if this rezoning request is denied, does the planning commission have an obligation to recommend a different zone to the city council?
No.
Okay,
If you make findings that are based on the evidence and the approval criteria that the proposal is not consistent with the zoning code and the comprehensive plan, that's enough to recommend denial of the proposal.
okay,
But you should keep in mind what's the range of feasible alternatives also. But yeah,
Good. Okay, Judy, you're okay?
I am. Thank you for checking in.
Okay, John, you're okay? I guess I either that's a foot or a hand. I can't. How am I seeing you? Okay, all right.
Maybe I need a new camera.
Okay, thank you. All right. Let me find my script. All right, so we've had the staff report. Now we have the applicant's report. Whoever is speaking, please give us your full name, your mailing address, your street address. You can go over there, and you can do whatever you want to.
May I sit?
You may sit too.
That was nice.
All right. You got it, okay? All right.
My name is Eric Eisenman. Last name is spelled Eisemann. I'm at 2554 Northeast 48th Avenue, Portland, Oregon. I'm the owner of a company called E² Land Use Planning Services. I've been doing this professionally, consulting with private and public entities since 1994. My work is primarily in the state of Oregon and the state of Washington. I have 30 years almost of working with smaller jurisdictions primarily. So I've worked with cities your size many, many times. And so I appreciate the work that you as planning commissioners do. I know it's not a high paying job. But I'm familiar with generally how needs of smaller communities are. With me today is Mr. Bob Morey, who's sitting back of me. He's the property owner. And also on Zoom is Carrie Richter. She's up in the left-hand corner. She's the applicant's attorney. Both Mr. Morey and Ms. Richter are here to answer your questions and to participate in this hearing fully. So please make use of that. I don't believe I need to go through the staff report in any detail. I think it is a thorough staff report. They have analyzed all of the relevant planning, comprehensive plan policies and goals. They've also looked at the applicable developed regulations. And so I concur with Mr. Phillips with his report and with his conclusion, in particular relating to the modified condition number 3/4 that he submitted yesterday that relates to the fence and the gate and the access easement for emergency services and for utilities. I could go into that and answer any questions you have about that, but I think what the solution that the city is proposing to resolve that access problem is a reasonable one. And it's very consistent with the Oregon Fire Code, and it's very consistent with jurisdictions have done all over the Northwest. So no problem there. Having, as I said, worked with local jurisdictions and small communities a lot, I appreciate the role that Mr. Phillips plays. And I know it can be a stressful one sometimes, but we all are here to do the public's bidding. So I have a couple of points I want to go into. And one in about 7 or 8 minutes worth of conversation here. First one is desire, and desire is why. So I remember back in the 2020, mid 2020, during the COVID period, Mr. Morey called me. We had worked before in the past here in Oregon, and we hadn't talked to him in several years. And he said, "Eric, I've got a proposal. I want to buy the old Gearhart Elementary School." And I said, "Well, that's interesting." And I said, "What do you want to do?" And he said, "Well, I'm going to save the school." And as a person who spent part of my career also advocating for historic preservation, like leading the charge to save Crater Lake Lodge, I appreciate the idea of trying to save an historic resource in a community. So I said, "So what is it you want to do? What are your goals?" And he said, "My primary goals are these. I want to try to find a way to keep the entrance into our community beautiful and attractive. I don't want that to become unsightly. and I want to save the school. That's it. I said, well, what do you want to do with the school? He said, well, there are a lot of opportunities. There's a lot of possibilities that we can work with here. There's park possibilities, there's community facilities possibilities, there's residential possibilities. There are options that we should be looking at, but the school is open for use right now. So that perspective from that very first day about what do you want to do, beautify the entrance to the city and save the school, is the one we're still working with today, but our proposals keep evolving over time. But right now, the important way to save that school is to provide an interim step. Planning is something that Rome wasn't built in a day, right? It takes a long time to make things happen. And so the interim step in order to protect the school is to allow it to be used for residential purposes. And the simplest way to do that is to rezone the property to a residential zone. And then the property can be used. Because no public entity, no nonprofit organization stepped up to purchase the property when the school was eligible for sale, there were conversations about it, and the record's complete with that as well. It's really up to the private sector to come forward and see what they can do. And that was Mr. Morey's proposal. Protect the entrance to the city, save the school, and let's see what we can do with the property. Let's have conversations about it. So unless something can happen, the property remains vacant. That doesn't really, in my opinion, serve the community's needs for an attractive entryway. And you've got 8.44 acres in the middle of your community that is not doing anything, not productive. So the question then that I'm here to talk about is what you're here to decide is what's the appropriate zone? We know that it's eligible for rezone. So what is the appropriate zone? Well, as a planner for 30 years, I know that where you always start, and all of you know this too, you start with the comprehensive plan. That's the foundation for whatever you do here. And it's been made perfectly clear in the public comments that the general development goal, the very first goal in your comprehensive plan, is to, quote, preserve low density, semi-residential character at Gearhart, end of quote. Now, if that's all there is to it, low density residential character Gearhart, then there's nothing more that happens in the community from then on, from 1994. But that's not how the plans work in this state. You've established a primary goal, which is to preserve the low density semi-residential character of Gearhart. But then you've adopted policies to implement that goal. And if you look just a couple of lines down below that in your comprehensive plan, there are 4 residential policies that interpret and that activate and that implement that primary goal. And I just want to remind you that the 2 of those important ones are, one is to preserve and maintain the residential character through zoning. So you have created low density zone, medium density zone, high density zone, and somehow that's all consistent with the general policy goal in this community, low density residential, 3 different kinds of zones. The other policy that's important is to implement land use regulations through, quote, continued development of Gearhart as a residential community, end of quote, continued development. That's forward looking. That's trying to find out what are we going to do to grow this community, to have jobs that people can work at and to have places that they can live in. When I analyzed the vacant and buildable lands analysis that the city and the county have been working on, and you find out that approximately 70% of the housing stock in this community is either second homes or short-term residential, that doesn't really serve the residents of the community who need a place to live, an affordable place to live. So the comprehensive plan anticipates new development. It also anticipates that you're going to maintain the residential character of the community. And that's what I think we're trying to do right now. If the comprehensive plan didn't anticipate new residential development, then why do you have zones that allow 6 units an acre or 16 units an acre? If it doesn't allow for new development, then why would the city have recently upzoned a piece of property to R3, high density residential? You must have found a way that is consistent with that general goal. So I'm going to stop with that and just say that we have looked at, in my 30 years of opinion and reading and writing comprehensive plans, and I've written several of them, we looked at every goal and policy that we thought was applicable. And we also took Carol Connell's pre-app notes very seriously. And I've known Carol since the early 80s. And we had similar kinds of jobs. We worked a lot for small towns. And we identified every policy and every goal that we thought was applicable, and we answered those. And Mr. Phillips has done the exact same thing in his staff report. And that's how you evaluate policies, or evaluate projects and proposals. Is it consistent with the comprehensive plan? We think it is, and we're grateful that Mr. Phillips also thinks so too. So let me just move on to the next thing, need. Why do we need this? Why do we need this proposal? Well, the city and the county planning documents, which I've referenced in my staff report, are my narrative, and which Mr. Phillips has referenced in his staff report, make it clear. They've acknowledged that the city of Gearhart has a need for long-term housing. You've got plenty of short-term housing. You have a need for long-term housing. And this fact, again, was confirmed by the recent upzone to R3 of the Pine Ridge property. There's a need, that's pretty clear. The 2021 Angela planning document that you all have was a buildable lands analysis. And it said that although there is an adequate supply of R1 land, you have more R1s, you have a lot of R1 land in terms of the size of your community, but your buildable lands analysis says that you don't have enough R2 zoning, and you certainly don't have enough R3 zoning, according to the buildable lands analysis, in order to accommodate what the state law requires, your 20-year population growth. So there's a need. So there have been some comments about how whether this project or our proposal for R2 is consistent with the character of the residential area around you, or consistent with the character of the neighborhood. So if you look at your zoning map, or you look at page 3 in my narrative, and there's a detail of the zoning map. And what we've already established is that there is commercial zoning immediately to the east, which does allow some forms of residential use as well. To the south and to the west, there is R1 zoning. And to the north, there's RCP zoning, which theoretically, although it's not going to happen, theoretically could allow 16 units an acre. So what we see is that we're creating R2 as a perfect transition zone between commercial and low density, between low density and high density zoning. And it's a good use of the property, because what we try to do with planning is we try to merge the edges and make things blend together. So we're thinking of this as a transition zone. So I want to move into what some of the comments have been, and that's about the future. What are we going to do in the future? And as we all know, as you've read in the reports already, that any future of the development of this site is limited by the capacity of the site to manage septic waste. That's obvious. On the east side of the property, we've already established that there is a floodplain, a flood hazard area, and there's also a wetland with a 25-foot buffer. And when we put in the fencing earlier on, we went through the DSL analysis of where the wetland is, and we have a pretty good idea of where that 25-foot buffer is. So the site is very constrained already as to where you can put septic. It pushes everything back up what little hill there is. And so for the past 2 winters, what the Morys have been doing through November and through the spring has been ongoing professional testing, evaluation, piezometers, hydrology, trying to figure out what that capacity is. And the testing is still going on this very day right now. And we're having a pretty wet winter again. And so there's probably going to be some more testing in the future because it's been damp. But that testing is going on to answer that one very fundamental question, and that is beyond one single family residence. We know that the site has handled a school in the past, but beyond the one single family residence that we're proposing, what is the septic capacity of the site? And I dearly would like to know the answer to that question. We can't say it's for certain, and that's why testing is continuing now. But from preliminary evaluation, we think that the R2 zone is probably where the sweet spot's going to be in terms of the capacity of the site, but we can't say for sure yet. There's been a lot of speculation, and it's in the record, about what will happen to the property in the future. And again, our immediate goal is this hasn't changed since 2020, and that's to save the school. And the honest answer, though, is what is the long-term what is their long-term goal? The long-term goal is to try to help the community come up with meet its long-term housing shortage problem. And R2 could do that in the future, but that's not going to happen right away because, as we've already established, there's more work that has to be done, and there's more public engagement that has to be done, and quite a few public meetings. So when we have that information, that's when those reports come in, when there is actual proposal. We only have one proposal right now, rezone the property so that it can be used for a residential property. But when we come back with a development proposal, we have to look at the traffic impacts. We have to look at congestion. We have to look at mobility. We have to look at public street improvements. We have to look at water. We have to look at sewer and utilities and everything else that your development code requires us to look at. And that's where there's going to be a great opportunity for have a really detailed conversation about what the proposal might be. So I just want to close with a couple of things. And just to reiterate, we've already done a lot of work. It's been 2.5 years trying to study the site, trying to figure out what to do from purchase to now. But there's a lot more work that needs to be done. And in the interim, we'd like to be able to use the building for one residential use so we can continue to protect the building, put a new roof on the building, waterproof the building, do those things that will stabilize the structure for the future. So we believe that with that, our proposal stands. We believe that the staff report is accurate. Their findings are accurate. We believe we meet all of the applicable plan goals and policies. We believe we meet the development regulations for a single family home, the lot sizes, et cetera. And we think that we've proposed a reasonable first step for the use of saving the school and providing an attractive entryway into the community. So with that, we do request your approval of our recommendation of approval for the R2 zone. And I know that Ms. Richter and Mr. Maury and I are here to answer any of your other questions. I'm sure there'll be some. So thank you for your time and particularly for your attention.
I have a question. When did we start with Mr. Maury?
Sometime in the mid-90s rather.
No, on this project.
Oh, he called me first time in the summer of 2020, somewhere around there. I think that's when he said, I'd like to buy the school. I think it was for sale then.
Okay. No, I just want to see your timeline
Sure.
with all the other information.
Sure. He had not purchased the school at that point.
Questions?
I have a question. Are you a licensed professional?
I have been licensed to practice law. I no longer practice
My
law.
condolences.
That's why I no longer do it. I like to resolve problems as opposed to fight about problems.
How do you describe yourself?
I'm a land use planner. I have.
And what you're telling us tonight is that this R2 is really the best use for this property?
Yes, given the need that the community has for housing. I don't think that R3 works, and I don't think that R1 gets you far.
That's not always been your opinion, no, has it?
No, it hasn't. When I first started this project, as I said at the beginning of my comments, that we were looking at a variety of different options. We were looking at parks, for example, but those conversations didn't get very far.
Because in September 3rd, 2020, Mr. Maury sent a letter, or I guess it's an email, everything's an email now.
Yes.
To Penrod at the seaside, I guess that's who. And in this letter, it says attached is Eric Eisman, is it my saying?
It's 3 syllables, Eisman.
Memo dated August 24th, which is a preliminary land use assessment, the elementary property. Eric's conclusion is that, quote, the school's property is not suitable for residential use.
I did write that.
It goes on, the land is best suited for use as a community park. Now, I put it to you that you gave that opinion because he was negotiating with the school district and they were relying on your opinion that this could not generate a profit. Is that a fair statement?
I don't agree with that statement.
Why? How do I reconcile what you said then and what you're saying now?
What I looked at that point would, in the planning world, we would say it's probably the 60,000 foot view, maybe
You knew
120,000.
the school district was going to rely on your opinion, right?
No, I did not know. I didn't have a conversation about them on reliance. No.
You didn't know, did you know he was negotiating with them to buy the property?
Yes, I did.
Okay. You didn't think your opinion would be used?
I couldn't put myself into their position. No.
Okay.
I know
just
what.
have a hard time reconciling what you said then
Sure.
and what you are presenting tonight.
At the time, what we were looking for was to try to find a way to do some community use of the property. A park would be a great.
Now we think it's
And
suitable for residential.
so what I was looking at that 60,000 foot level was, well, what do the maps show me in terms of wetlands? What do the maps show me in terms of floodplains? What do the maps show me in terms of tsunami hazard overlay zone? And all of those things in my mind said, there's some serious problems with this property right now. Maybe that's why the school got out. I don't know the answer to that. So at that point, I thought this is not suitable.
So why didn't you look at all those things when you gave this opinion?
I still had to rely on the expert evaluation of a wetland biologist, for example. And so I was at, as I said, at a 60,000 foot level, giving my preliminary analysis.
Hey.
All I have on Commissioner Graff's question. February 21st, 2022, we received an email from Mr. Maury stating that it would only be suitable for the most R1.
Okay,
It is addressed to the planning commission. And everyone here knows I'm notorious for keeping everything.
I have no accepting.
So by April,
Yeah, thanks.
by April, it went to R2. But it started out, as Commissioner Graff said, park.
Mhm.
I'm confused.
In terms of what Mr. Murray wrote, I would suggest you ask him that
Okay.
directly.
Then I will do that. Thank you. Okay. Do we have any more questions for Mr. Eisenman?
No.
Do Judy or John have any questions?
I do not.
Okay. Did anyone else want to speak for the applicant? You may.
My name is Bob Morey. We live at 271 D Street in Gearhart.
And that is your home.
That is our home address. One
And your mailing address?
P.O. Box 2759 Gearhart.
She needs to write all this down.
Yeah.
So it's.
One, I want to thank Eric and Carrie for their work. I'm the one who gave the analysis to the school district. It wasn't Eric writing for the school district for me. We were looking at this transaction. I was looking at the transaction and saying, what's our best economic reading of this transaction? And to me, it was one of the dumbest real estate deals we could do. We got involved with this to save the entrance to the city. This was not a profit-making venture. Carrie, come on, Carrie. This was a matter of how much are we prepared to lose and invest before we save the school and preserve the entrance to the city. We did not want to be living with what we're dealing with across the street on Glen. That's why it was fenced. Carrie wrote that memo that I then shared with Susan. When we dropped our offer from, I think we were $750,000 at that time to $200,000 for the school. And that was saying, it's not, I consider the school a negative number in terms of value as a development, period, unless you knew a lot more about it, but you're going to have to invest a heck of a lot of money to understand what are the risks with that project. We've spent 2.5 years studying it. I do not know the answers yet, but I do know it's zoned and can be zoned for a single family residence, which justifies preserving the school. It needs a new roof. It needs to be waterproof. We did that analysis at the beginning and buying it. We knew it. We walked into the project knowing there were going to be problems. We have no idea. Nobody knew where septic systems went on the school. Hey, 300 people there, they have no idea where the septic systems went. We had portable classrooms sitting on top of septic fields. You know, you don't know these things, but I expected unknowns when we bought it. The goal from day one was save the school, have a good entrance to the city, and then see what the heck we can do with the project to make something worthwhile out of it. The simple request we have in front of you today is a single house on 8 some acres. It has traffic impacts of 9 trips a day. And we're going to end up spending money to save the school. What we do in the future, I don't have any idea in the world what we're going to do in the future. I know we're going to spend money. But we'll have a safe school, and it'll be a single family residence. And what we have to look at is what got us involved with this on another hand was our grandchildren trying to find a place to rent in this community, Seaside, looked in Warrenton, the garbage they were looking at to live in. There's a tremendous need for long-term rental housing. We'd always be happy to put a covenant on the thing if we do something that says this will only be long-term rental housing. It cannot be sold. It'll be something, but we have an apartment code that needs to be changed. We do not have a cluster housing code. These things are going to take, if we have achieved something in 3 to 5 years, I'd be ecstatic. And whatever I put down on that thing, Virginia, everything has been a growing thing. Ideas I had the day we bought the school have been proven utterly idiotic. We've changed what we're doing because we get in data as we get into the school. We figured, oh, geez, who wants to take care of a 75-year-old boiler and try to keep it running? We keep the school at 50 degrees. You want to live in a 50-degree school? You want to run business in it? Okay. We specifically knew from day one, you could not do commercial. It's not in our code or not our comp plan. So any idea we have, when someone talks about, oh, I have to make a profit, we walked into this, my wife said, just try not to lose a lot of money. We walked in to save the damn school. So I've been very irritated as a person that people are taking what we've done as something other than trying to preserve something that's iconic. One of our neighbors, Marie, was one of the original classes in that school when I go up and visit with her. These are nice things. It's a great thing in the community. And if it gives you some idea of our background, but absolutely that note was not written for the school district. It was written for me. I shared it with Susan, so she understood it. Then I shared it with Matt Brown to encourage the city to buy the damn school because it should be
Watch your
part.
language, please.
I apologize. To buy the school. And there was no interest on the city's part in trying to put together a group. We suggested, there's in correspondence. We suggested you get a group of people together. We might have kicked in some money towards it, or get a private entity to get involved with it, try to do something to buy the school and save the area for the community. There was no interest with anybody. The Bodners were the only people that I know who made an offer, and we didn't even know they existed until the city council meeting. We had no idea what price they were offering. And we made an offer, and what is in the information provided to you tonight, was they had an opportunity to match or beat that offer. You know, we made an offer that was $275,000 less than their offer. That's how we stole it from them. That makes no sense. So again, our message is to save the school, improve the entrance to the city, avoid what we have across the street on Glen. And thank you for taking the time to let me speak. Any
Can I make a
questions?
comment?
Yes, Gary.
If I believe you, and I hear your story, I've been hearing it, we're neighbors for those who don't
Yeah.
know from the beginning. But if I were in your situation, I would withdraw my application. I would continue the testing. Instead of doing this on your own, I would work with the community. If your goal is really to save the school, you could get community support. You could come up with a plan with the community, save the school, and accomplish what you want to accomplish.
Well, Terry, and let's come back to what we might want to accomplish. You save the school, but I'm looking at making capital investments in this thing now, Terry. So, you know, whatever money we've spent now, it's more than a few $1,000s.
I'm sure it is.
And I know right now I've got to put a roof, and that'll be a large number. Know what a house costs. This is a very large number. And we have to waterproof it. I want to have some certainty from my end. I know I can't do anything more than have that house on that property. And I happen to like our neighborhood, Terry. Okay. But with that, I have an asset that my wife and my family are protected. So we've got an asset there. But I can't do anything more, Terry.
Be addressed in all of
I
this.
apologize.
But
We all are making a decision, not
Yeah.
just Terry.
I'm not saying that you shouldn't. I mean, people, I think in most people's mind, probably someday there is going to be some housing there. I say some housing there. So if you were to work with the community, it would work for you and it would work with the community.
And to all of you, that's what we feel we're doing. We're doing. I'm sorry, Mr. David. Yes.
You know, my problem is I love the idea of saving the school, but then when you want to be zoned R2, which has, you know, we have two different, you know, we're looking to have the entrance to the town being a lovely spot, open space, you know, schools sitting there, that's awesome. And then we want to be R2, which, you know, satisfies a need in the community, but it's not gonna satisfy rule number 1, which is the pleasant entry to the city.
Now, this is where, does anybody have a bottle of
If we
water?
have questions for him specifically, let's stick to our specific questions and then we
Okay.
can discuss. So,
Um,
specific questions and we'll keep it on track here.
Russ, it's R2 for a reason, and it's like Eric mentioned, we have a variety of codes that we can do housing on it here, R1, R2, R3. You can see how people got all excited about how much density is coming on. I have no idea. Hydrology says on this site, it can probably handle no more than 26 units of some sort. But we don't know if it has septic capacity for that much. One of the things you're looking at, if you come back and say, and make it R3 or another zone, you come up with a design. My vision of this thing has always been cottages, individual rental cottages, 2-bedroom, 1 bath, scattered around here. So you've got density. You have almost 8.5 acres to give yourself a feeling of open space. The last thing you want to do is cram density on the thing. It'd be a lousy thing to see every day, particularly on the house in the middle. But I see it being a bunch of cottages, which are consistent with the history of Gearhart, of having small cottages that you rent out long-term. If that helps you a little on the vision of why you'd be doing it, I agree with you 100%. You do not want to have, the last thing I want to do is see something like no matter how much money somebody makes, the thing we get when we come into Seaside by, what's his name, the Les Schwab. That isn't the vision. Think of the ex-mayor's little cottage up off of E Street, something that has a feeling that it fits in a village. And the name on the project, the name I put on it today was the Village of Gearhart School, if it has living around it. Initially, but it's never going to have commercial stuff in it because we can't do it. Don't want to do it. So I'm sorry. Anybody else have any other
We have
questions?
questions on specific about the testimony or findings or anything in here. Go ahead, Jared.
I'm just a little confused about a couple things. In the letter that Terry referred to, it goes on to say, I concur that getting approvals to develop the parcel profitably as a residential development of any type is highly unlikely. That's your statement.
Absolutely. And I still feel the
Wait,
same.
wait. So about that thought process, and then you go on to talk about, turning it into a park and how you would donate some funds, which is a really, it's a commendable sentiment. So my first question is, what happened?
Well, first of all, that was a letter written when we were walking away from the deal. Okay, that has nothing to do with us purchasing in time and place. And also this, remember, it's a pretty unique little project. So at that point in time,
It says in the letter, it says purchase price to be $200,000 payable in cash at closing.
and we were under contract at $750,000 at that time. And the school district decided that was not sufficient funds. And that's when that dissolved. At that point in time, we're thinking, at that point in time, when I wrote that letter to Susan, I also gave the same letter to Matt Brown. So Matt could try to get a public-private thing started where there was but it's not going to start without being driven by the city wanting to see that preserved. There was no interest in saving that asset.
Okay, so what you're saying, I'm just trying to be clear about
Sure.
this. What you're saying is that because the city didn't express interest, that's what caused you to change your mind about the
No, time passed. That was done at one point in time. When did we write that letter?
That was September of 2020.
2020. We're walking away from the
Before you
deal.
purchased the school.
Yeah, walking away from the deal comes back. The idea that it's park space, again, now you have a whole different attitude now. That's my analysis of what it should have been. If the city wanted to run park space, I am now buying the thing as an individual saying, okay, we've analyzed it. We said it makes no sense to do it as a development deal because of political constraints in the city and the attitude on the council at the time. Just makes no interest, but let's see if we can get the council involved. There was no interest in the council being involved. That didn't diminish our interest in saving the entrance to the city. That stayed unchanged. And if you save the entrance to the city, I can show you plans we had drawn of trying to make housing out of, or office space or whatever out of some of the portables. I have architectural drawings of how we're going to save it. Well, after wasting a few $1,000s, we decided to take them all out.
Okay, and then my next question, the school is huge,
Yeah,
and how is that gonna be a single family?
I'll tell you, we are in love with our school. It is, I was raised in 646 feet with a widowed grandmother and a younger brother. It's a little bigger than my background, okay, and we have no family income. So when I look at the school, I sit back and say, God darn, and my wife's house was probably smaller than one classroom. Each classroom's 918 square feet. Again, we tried to touch base, as Chad would say, we're trying to do something with it, maybe city doing office space and the like in it, but it wasn't, again, something that fit. And this is the deal, by the way, the city should never have bought. By the way, it's just too complicated. The decisions I'm going to make every day have nothing to do with a plan. But we've continued moving forward. So yeah, you look at it and say, nice, but that, I don't know, that it's just a big room. This weekend, it was raining on Sunday. You know, I'm almost 80 years old. I want to go walk at night. I don't want to go out and get pneumonia. I walk inside the school. I have an eighth of a mile indoor walking track. Why would we like it? Well, it's nice. I get old. My kids all have a room,
So
but that isn't what I want to do.
You're saying you're gonna move into the school?
Somebody's going to.
I'm sorry, I'm not following this because you're not gonna get anybody to buy a, I don't know what it is, 24,000 square foot building that's near the highway as their single family.
I'm dumb enough to buy the building. I would move into it if I could preserve the site.
Okay, so the possibility is that you're gonna move into it?
Yeah,
Okay, all right.
yeah.
I
I already live in Gearhart. I have the same PO box. Doesn't have to
So
move far.
you're gonna sell the house, the large house that you live in now? and
Well,
then move into it?
You can't, I don't need two houses in Gearhart.
Right, exactly. That's-
I agree. And in our ideal situation, Sharon, come and say Sharon on it.
Yes, absolutely.
My ideal situation would be to rehab, save the school and create basically a village around it of long-term rental cottages that are there and again, I don't use workforce housing. Housing here is so expensive, but it'd be just long-term housing around it. The housing, I have a house we like. I find I can't walk up and down the stairs to my office at my house now as much as I like it. And where I will be in 10 years, I like the idea it's all flat. It just happens to be big. It's the biggest house in Gearhart.
I'm just curious, but you know, everything you're telling us falls flat if you sell this property, which you have every right to.
We have no desire to sell the property. My ideal, if I had my ideal.
But you can say that.
No, and come back.
Things change, as we've seen,
Yeah.
things change.
But the ideal, if you're coming back to what's the motivation? They do change and we can sell the property, but the ideal motivation is to create the housing. And I would just as soon see my grandchildren there picking up rents 50 years from now. And they are living in an environment they know. And
Thank you.
thank you for the question.
Ladies, I will ask you to have private conversations because they're not private. Because they're back there talking, we can hear you on recording. Thank you. I saw someone.
Yeah, that was me, Mr. Maury. Thank you for being here. I have a question about school, the building itself. It's rumored that there's asbestos or lead pipes and that kind of stuff. Can you tell me your findings?
All of that is true.
Okay.
And yeah, I think Susan Eddy pointed out, when we started this project, I had a structural engineer look at the thing to begin with, and the structural engineer's idea is, yes, you can save it. Okay, now then we had a structural waterproofing engineer look at the thing. We identified what needed to do and trying to deal with waterproofing and roofing and what we had to do there. So everything you do is fine. And one of the reasons I like having this a single family house, I don't want to have 200 people running through a building with a bunch of asbestos and lead-based paint that I'm responsible with. I find it's my family. Everybody can talk to each other and say, you don't go down there, you don't do this. We had the exterior repainted and with a firm that happened to have the appropriate licensing to take off the lead-based paint. It wasn't just taken off, it was done with that. We had mitigating companies coming in, taking off the siding where we had sides by the library that the stucco came off. That was, it had asbestos in it. We had stuff down to the ground, guys in suits. Yeah.
Is your plan to mitigate that?
It was all done. Oh, no, there's nothing that really, you stay away from it. You don't mitigate, you encapsulate. It stays encapsulated. Thank God, most of our asbestos is in tunnels. And again, this is a pretty low, had a lot of people, but there's not a lot of mechanical things going on. We have plumbing and bathrooms there are 4 bathrooms in the 1968 edition at the northerly end. They have toilets and sinks. The rest of the rooms don't have toilets and sinks in terms of classrooms.
So
I'm sorry.
Thank you. You're doing great. Let's say, look into the future at some point when you're not the person necessarily living there and someone else is going to be living there. That's, without the removal of that or the mitigation of that, that seems like not the ideal situation. Have you done a cost analysis of repairing all of that compared to tearing down the building?
Never have. Never thought of tearing down the building because I felt it could be habitable or saved. Again, you can always save the building and close the doors. Again, it's there, but you want to have some use. So to make it habitable. And you got to remember, it was habitable for 300 kids in this community and a bunch of teachers 2.5 years ago. We had people in there functioning in that space. Again, we are not looking at trying to disturb any of the stuff in the tunnels and doing that. We specifically decommissioned the boilers right at the beginning. But we can lock off the boiler room. We have plenty of space. Don't have, yeah, sorry, Don.
No, that you're, had you considered applying for the parks zone?
Never. The reason being, right now, it's just too early in the thing. The only land that's suitable that would be the park zone, if you want to go over and walk on the easterly side of the entrance road. Now, we looked at, in the history, we looked at giving the city access to that. Came out what we needed because of the security, like you have across the street, you do. Security was key to us in giving it access. It would be $1 a year lease or something, nothing significant. But we needed to know the gates would be locked in the morning and open in the evening. That wasn't acceptable to the city. And from my standpoint, we were looking at security at that time. We hadn't have our lighting up on it. We had, so people can come over the gates, come over the fence. And we've had that. We've had that with the people in camping. We've had people over there hitting golf balls, running their dogs. And then
Well, the reason I asked about why the park zone is because there's a conditional use in that zone that allows for a dwelling for a caretaker or a watchman or for staff.
Yeah.
And it would seem a progression or an evolution, as Mr. Eisenman suggested, that we go from the PSP zone to its most closely like zone, which would be the P zone, which would then allow you to rehabilitate that building and then to come up with a plan and develop it into maybe potentially an R2 zone.
May I answer that question?
Yeah, please, Eric.
You're absolutely right. That is the caretaker is allowed use in the P zone already. And we did submit an application to allow caretaker's unit, but the staff report that came out at the time said that it was their opinion that the caretaker's unit had to be attached to a public use, and there was no public use anymore. So we withdrew that application. And so if it was a park, if that same logic still holds that Carol stated, then how could we have a caretaker's unit in a park zone if there's no park?
Is there anyone living in the school now?
No, I have night security at the school who happen to live at my house. But thank God I have a grandson and his fiance who can stay at the school at night. And it makes a heck of a lot of difference because that has stopped some intrusion of vandalism from across the street. And where, again, that's this issue, we're all facing down there.
Then my last question is about the fence. You applied for the fence permit in December 2020 and put the fence up for safety and security for your property, especially while you tried to evaluate it. And now there is an issue on Glen Avenue that we know about, the homeless camp, everybody. And I'm confident the city is doing their best to try to manage that. What are your plans for the fence?
The fence, well, Liberty United, this happens to be happening over the next week. We are doing, let's call it softening of the entire fence along Pacific Way. We're planting ceanothus that will grow to be 8-10 feet high all along the fence along Pacific Way. The fence is going nowhere for security. Gating, if we ever had a community there, there'd be no gate at the front. I mean, there are people living there. That you know, an individual house is a different thing, but once it becomes a community, then you know the fence, the gate would come out. The fencing will stay there. We're doing the same thing with ceanothus. If you have that north-south fence that goes up, or the north-south fence that goes up the east side of the entrance road, we're doing ceanothus all along that fence, also to soften it. So when you look at, you see green and not chain link fence. The last thing I want to look at is chain link fence. The other thing we're doing is we're planting, you know, a couple hundred, 100 or 150 trees around the perimeter there too, that will mature over the years. This is all while we're deciding what we're doing with, again, we have no idea the end result. And I would like to tell you we do. And man, Virginia, may I segue into how I see it happening on the road, or would you prefer me stopping?
You have, I have no way to limit time or what you say during the applicant's.
Okay, the only thing that,
But we.
yeah, let's get on, and that's enough. Thank you for your time, and I hope you get some background on where I'm thinking about the project. So thank you all.
Do you have anyone else that wants to speak for your?
Not at
No,
this, not at this
You're
time.
not the applicant. I'm not the applicant. No, you're not the applicant. This is only applicant. I have basically 3 names.
Ms. Victor is on Zoom and she's available for questions or for.
Did she have anything she wanted to add at this point?
No.
She
Not at
should
this
be
time.
there.
Thank you.
Okay, I am calling to call a 5-minute recess, please, for those people who can stand up and use the restroom or whatever it might be. We will come back afterwards and we will hear first proponents speak and then we will hear opponents speak. Okay, so stand up, stretch, whatever you need to do. Let's resume. That's, you know, sometimes we just need a break.
The applicant is not back.
Applicant is not back. On the way. Okay, I will be politely. So I hope you're all enjoying our Gearhart spring.
What's
Oh.
Can I say something?
Yes.
The Warriors are at 27 to 20.
Who's that?
The Warriors over Sacramento.
Sorry, Terry.
What game?
It's a playoffs.
Is that California?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
We actually have basketball there in Portland.
Oh, basketball, thank you.
I believe you're out of order. Yeah. No, I'm not gonna threaten. Okay, so we will resume now. The meeting is, took maybe a 7-minute break there for the records, but, okay. So moving ahead, we have heard from the applicant, we have asked their questions. Now is the chance for the proponents to speak. And I have listed here 3 proponents, and I will call on you if you would like to speak, so that you may speak. The way we're going to work it, we will start the timer 3 minutes at a max, and I do cut you off. After you give your name, your address, because again, Angeline has to keep track of it. So, Pat Roberts, would you like to speak? Please give us your name, your physical address, your mailing address.
It's actually Patricia Roberts.
I'm sorry, that's what
I
you
know, I just wrote down that. It's 366 North Ocean Avenue, Gearhart, 97138, post office box 2406. And somebody asked me why am I a proponent when I fought the golf course? I said, well, 2 different people. I look at what's been done at the school so far, physical improvements made. And if you can fault those, I think that sets a precedent for what Mr. Moore is thinking when he says he's aesthetics. He doesn't necessarily tell you what he's gonna do because he doesn't know. I professionally rehab old buildings in Portland. Currently, I have a half block of 1930s, all CMU that need seismic upgrades. So talk about a crazy project. When you buy a building or get involved with a project, you don't always know what the end is. And so this makes perfect sense to me. My only point is that Gearhart has no land for affordable housing. Show me one other lot in this state where it's even possible to put up a duplex or triplex, or maybe a fourplex, but where? And that's what I see as the potential for this city, and we need it. I was a county commissioner. I know even then, 8 years ago, that you needed affordable housing. It's even worse now. So I rest my case. This is at least a possibility.
Thank you for your comments. Okay, that is the only proponent I have here. I'm sorry, I had misstated something earlier. Or do you have any other proponents there? Are there any proponents on the Zoom that would like to speak?
Just give another moment here. I'm seeing none.
Okay, We are not seeing any. And so now I will go to opponents, and the first one I have is Susan Eddy. Yeah, please give us your name, your physical address, and your mailing address.
Hi, I'm Susan Edie. I'm sorry, but that's okay. Once upon a time, I was Eddie, and part of the clan moved away from Canada to the US. Dropped a D.
It's my Canadian.
Susan Edie, 707 F Street, Gearhart.
Is that your mailing?
Yes, thank you. I wanted to begin by thanking all of the Planning Commission and President Gideon for their input in creating such a marvelous summary of our comprehensive plan and our town's guiding light. It was fantastic. Thank you. And I think it was a wonderful education for everyone in Gearhart. Mr. Maury, I would also like to tell you that the exterior of the school does look much better than it ever did. And I like the pink color choices very much. At this point, I feel very confused after tonight's meeting, and I feel like I have more questions now than I did prior. And I feel a little jumbled in my thoughts, so I'm sorry about that. But one thing that I don't understand is why we're requesting a change from R1 to R2 when all of the neighborhoods surrounding the entire 8.5 or how many acres there are R1. So that would be a big change. And I guess the only thing is workforce housing or making rentals available, but it doesn't seem in keeping with our comprehensive plan to me. I'm also confused about the use of the school. You mentioned that you yourself would like to live in it, and it sounds like perhaps your son and fiance are spending the night there sometimes, but it's not really a habitable place. And it's my understanding that if it became apartments, then it would have, at some point in the future, it would then have to be changed to an R3 zone. I feel like there are so many questions that need to be resolved before anything moves forward. I'm curious about the wetlands, and from what I've read, the Army Corps of Engineers is required to be involved according to Section 404 of the Clean Water Act of the US. It just, it sounds like the wetlands and the maintenance of our creeks are such a vital, important point of keeping the environment of Gearhart safe and the quality of life here as it should be. I'm concerned about is that 3 already? Okay.
Thank you. It goes by quick.
Yes, it does.
Thank you for your comments.
Thank you.
I am trying to read the next name, Susan. Spring, okay, I thought it said Spring, but I wasn't sure. All right.
It's just Spring. No Spring. We keep talking about.
Your full name?
Susan Spring, box 2728, 641 3rd Street. That's it, right?
Yes.
We keep talking about the aesthetic that we expect, that we are promised, that we don't quite know what it would be, what it would look like. From the moment the fence went up, I know exactly what it looked like. And I know exactly what the attitude was about it. And nothing else has changed. The people across the street, the homeless people have been there maybe a month. The fence has been there years. So that really isn't a good excuse for it. I think that area should be a park. I think it's too bad that it was purchased. I think it was too bad that now we have to figure out some way to make that investment, have some money for Mr. Money. But I'm not sure that there's any other reason to make it housing. We have places that We don't have need workforce housing. We don't have a lot of people that work in Gearhart. If they work, they come from someplace else. I was amazed at during the firemen's Christmas gifts 2 years ago, that there wasn't a fireman who lived in Gearhart. And I think that is unfortunate, but I'm not sure that 2-bedroom, one bathroom apartments are going to make it. I don't think people want to live in apartments generally. I think they want to. So I think that Mr. Money has to go back to the drawing board and he has to figure out something to do with this purchase that makes sense to this city. And this is not it. And I think he's pretty sure it's not it either. He's very conflicted about it in many ways.
Thank you for your comments. The next one I have is Vicki Abramson.
Right,
Yes.
Vicki Abramson, 207 North Cottage. Okay, ABRAHAMSON. It has a bra, a ham, and a son.
And your physical address and your mailing address.
207 North Cottage. And I have PO Box 2093. I guess where I'm kind of with Susan Edie as well, is that I'm very confused. I've read the packet, I've read the report from the interim planner. And, you know, I go back to your desire to save the entrance of our city and to save the school and the beautification of the city. But I feel like I go back to that letter that you wrote to the school superintendent. And that was, I just want to quote that because I think it's really very important, because you originally thought that it could be a park. And you were, I would say, really a conscientious philanthropist at one point in offering to buy the school, the property for $200,000. And then, as it says here, the Morey Family Foundation will make $100,000 grant to the Seaside School District to be used to purchase and install new playground equipment at the new elementary school in Seaside. And the grant will fund concurrent with the closing of the school, which would have been in October 15, 2020. All the playground equipment at the school will remain at the school. And so it really was saying, Mr. Eisman started out by saying that this really wasn't, his conclusion was that the school property is not suitable for a residential. And so I'm confused because tonight, all of a sudden it's really suitable for this R3 designation. So I'm totally against it. Thank you.
Thank you. Next one, Jacob Reddicock.
Right here.
Stand where he is if he wants to and speak from there.
Okay, I'm Jacob Reddicock. We live at 306 North Marion. Our telephone number is.
We don't need your phone number.
Our box is 2061.
KOB.
That adequate?
Okay, and you got the PO box 206.
Yeah.
206, okay.
Okay, a number of years ago, I was concerned about the health of our people in Gearhart. Now, being a physician, that's one of the first things I am concerned about. I got a bunch of people here in Gearhart to sign a petition to make a walking course around the golf course. And lo and behold, I presented this to the city council, and lo and behold, 2 years later, we had a walking path around the golf course. It has morphed into a bicycle path in the meantime, but that's okay. And it was so well received that Pat Roberts even petitioned the governor to give us a commendation for that. Now, I would like to see this park that we're talking about being used as we could use it as a parkour park. We could use it as a baseball park. We could use it as all kinds of athletic events. So my concern is for the health of the people of Gearhart to please think about this again. And let's turn down the process of rezoning and let's make it into a park instead. Thank you.
Thank you. Tom, please.
I am not gonna say anything.
Oh, well,
I'm gonna make it short.
okay, you can be that way. Betty Smith?
Elizabeth Smith, it's okay, I wrote it. Elizabeth Smith, 236 North Cottage Avenue, PO Box 2312. Mine's really short. If the idea to save the school was for the community, but the community can't use it, why should we care?
Thank you. All right, we're now on to those people on Zoom, because I called everyone on my list, that would like to speak. Chad, I will have to rely on you for this.
Right, I do have one hand.
I see a hand.
And that would be Richard Newman.
Hello, I'm Cheryl Newman. I'm Rich's wife. And we live, our vacation home is 258 West Kershal Circle in Gearhart. And our residence is in Beaverton, Oregon, 16635 Southwest Estuary in Beaverton. So
Just slow down, wait. What was your first name?
Cheryl, Cheryl Newman.
Okay.
And our vacation home, did you get that?
I got your Kershal, I need your.
Our residence is Beaverton, Oregon, 16635 Southwest Estuary Drive in Beaverton.
Anything else? Thank you.
Okay. Okay to go ahead?
Yes.
Okay, well, we have a real vested interest in all of this because we live right next to where the old ball field was. And we're the ones that put up the fence, split it with Mr. Maury to define our property from the school property. What I'm concerned about is how things have kind of changed. And I realize once you buy something, things change. You find out things about the school and the property you didn't know. But I'm a little vexed to learn that now the long-term plan might be long-term rental cottages with 2 bedrooms and 1 bathroom. And I'm just concerned with what kind of a family would want to purchase anything, or not purchase, but rent something like that. I would have a question about what long-term means, whether it means a year, 2 years, whatever. I would have a question about anybody living in the school if the boiler doesn't work and the heat's at 50 and there's asbestos and lead pipes. So it looks really good on the outside. I agree. It's a big improvement. Unfortunately, I don't see anything on the inside that's been improved enough for anybody to live there. So if you're going R2, you're saying somebody's going to live there? And I know we talked to Mr. Maury, we walked through the school with him. It was nice to see his ideas, and I know they've changed some. But initially it was to put senior apartments in the school classrooms. And it was to use the library maybe as a community library and to have kids come and play basketball in the gym and rent that. I don't know if I see that happening with lead pipes and asbestos. And Mr. Maury did state too that he didn't want a whole bunch of people walking in it because of those things. So you're saving the school looking on the outside, but not so much on the inside, and then surrounding it with long-term small rentals. just doesn't seem to me to be a real attractive thing to see as you're going in, and also surrounded by a chain link fence to be a real attractive thing to see as you're going into the community. So I have a lot of questions, and I'm wondering if it's really time to change it to R2 until we get the septic questions answered and some of those things done before we even decide if there's even a possibility of putting any kind of rentals in.
Okay, thank you for your input.
Thank you very much.
Is there anyone else you have that would like to speak?
I will check in advise.
You should see you from this side, Jack.
It's like playing a video game. Like whack-a-mole.
He's actually playing solitaire.
Choose. Yes. No, there's no.
There's no one else. Okay. Are there any? I don't have anyone with neutral comments. Does anyone want to make a neutral comment? No. All right. So my last thing here is applicant's rebuttal. Would the applicant like to rebut anything at this point that might have been said?
Ms. Richter is on the Zoom call, and I'm sure that's her approval.
Okay, so can you pull her in?
Yep, she is ready to go.
Okay,
Can you hear me?
yes.
Thank you, Chair and Planning Commission. My name is Carrie Richter. I'm an attorney at the law firm Bateman Seidel. My office address is 1000 Southwest Broadway, Suite 1910, Portland, Oregon, 97204. I want to start with thanking everybody who, including the Planning Commission, taking the time to hear Mr. Mori and Mr. Eisman's testimony, as well as my own. Much of the testimony that you've heard tonight is not relevant to the task at hand. Some of the examples of that sort of irrelevant testimony include a lot of regret that this is not a city park. And this is not the forum to decide whether or not the city ought to have purchased the property or not. The negotiations over and the terms relating to the sale of the property to the applicant, that's not germane to the approval criteria. The history of planning in Gearhart, and a lot of second guessing about Mr. Mori's motives. Whether Mr. Mori is a good dreamer, or his dreams are what match ours, or whether he's a good businessman are not factors that are to be taken into consideration as part of this review. The task is only to determine whether or not this particular application satisfies the 5 zone change criteria set forth in the zoning ordinance, section 11.040, and nothing more. There's been a lot of question raised about whether R2 is the right zone. And I think that the testimony that Mr. Eisman presented is that R2 is the right zone because it's the happy medium zone. It is the zone that serves as the suitable transition between the R1 zoning on the west and the commercial zoning on the east. We try to transition different uses so that the impacts are not as abrupt. And that's why R2 is the right zone. It's also the right zone because that's what the city's housing needs inventory showed. I'd like to, I'm not sure, but I think it was Commissioner Graff who raised a question about responding to Mr. Brown's testimony. And I'd like to step in and try to do that. I'd like to point out that the question before the Planning Commission is not to decide the right zone. The question is whether or not this application shows that the criteria are satisfying the R2 zone. And the question is whether the amendment is consistent with the comprehensive plan. And the case Mr. Brown is making is that the general policy to preserve the low density and semi-rural character of Gearhart is not satisfied by an R2 zone in this case. And as Mr. Eisman pointed out, the city has R2 and high density zones in it now. So presumably those zones are consistent with the comprehensive plan and would be consistent here, assuming that the impacts can be addressed. I'd also like to point out that the language of that comprehensive plan policy talks about to preserve the low density character. That suggests we're preserving what is there. So that would mean you couldn't go rezone an R1 zoned area to R2. That would be inconsistent with the plan policy. But I do not believe that changing the zoning from a public zone to an R2 zone in this case has any effect on the low density character of Gearhart, because we're not affecting the overall amount of R1 low density zoned land. I also think that when you look at the plan policies that implement that general statement, they talk about protecting from negative impacts. That's what protects the rural character, is the negative impacts, avoiding the negative impacts. And what the city planner and Mr. Eisman both explained is that in order to develop 30 units or 25 units or any units over eight units, Mr. Mori would have to come in and file an application for a subdivision. Subdivision with review carries with it a review of all of the transportation impacts, all of the infrastructure impacts, water, septic, everything that the testimony we've heard today folks have concerns about. And I would go even further to offer to the Planning Commission that how about a condition of approval that reads something along the lines of that the applicant shall be prohibited from any additional dwelling units beyond one single family residence without a type 3 review. In other words, a type 3 review would be required for, and a type 3 review is the type of review that you're going through right now, for any dwelling units beyond one. That condition would result in the type of review, robust review that you've heard testimony and concerns about, that this project isn't fully baked. We're not ready to decide what impacts more than one dwelling will have. And so I would be happy to work with your staff to draft that condition if that's something that you might be interested in pursuing. Going back to Mr. Brown's letter, he proposes that that one of the comprehensive plan goal 8 relating to parkland should be used to require an open space zone here, or that would prohibit a R2 zone, or require denial. I would like to point out that that plan policy says the city will encourage indoor and outdoor recreation facilities, both private and public, attractive to visitors and residents. In the zone, the open space zone, only public parks and recreation facilities are allowed as conditional uses. A non-public park is not a permitted use. And as Mr. Eisman pointed out, a dwelling for a caretaker or watchman or housing for staff is constrained to when you have a park to watch. You have a park to staff. And when we don't have a public park here, that zone is not appropriate. And the plan policy is to encourage indoor and outdoor recreation facilities, not require it. And as I think the planning staff pointed out, this property is not identified on the city's master plan as suitable for parkland. The question of need has come up in Mr. Brown's letter, and he talks about the land not being necessary at this point because it won't necessarily be affordable housing. And I believe that my condition that I propose to constrain all future uses to any dwellings beyond single-family residential would respond to this concern and would ensure that there is a discussion before there are apartments or cottages or workforce housing or whatever may come next. I want to point out one last thing, and I think that it's important to understand that, and you all talked about this early on, the code says that should a governmental entity or private party cease using such land for public or semi-public uses or purpose, or should the utilization be changed, then they shall automatically be eligible for reclassification into another district. The staff indicated that they thought that this was an invitation for a rezone. And I believe that automatically be eligible means that a private party is entitled to a zone that they can do something with. And R2 will allow Mr. Mori to do something with his property, which is protect the school by putting it into a single family residential use. And I want to, whether or not, it's important for you to understand that Mr. Mori will not be able to put it into single family residential use unless it complies with all of the city building codes and fire codes, and there won't be a family in there with no boiler and 50 degrees. Those are things that the city has regulations in place to protect for. And so it is not the case that there will be an unsafe situation. I want to close by saying that I believe that the concerns that have been expressed are this sort of sky is falling, worst case. And what I'm offering, and I would like to have an opportunity to discuss with the commission, are conditions that would allow Mr. Mori to continue working on this property, continue saving the building, getting somebody in there, getting plants put around the fence, gardening happening, and a continued conversation with the planning commission and the community about the best use, future final use. If you don't have any other questions, I appreciate your time, and I hope you will approve this request. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Did any of you have questions for her, Angley? Can we go back to John and Judy so I can see that?
Yes, ma'am.
I do have a question. That was a very, I'm sorry?
Go ahead.
That was a very interesting piece of testimony with the offer of the condition. I want to make sure that either Peter or Garrett explains that offer to me a little bit better in regards to a condition that would allow only the use for one single family home unless it came back to this body for what was referred to as a type 3 review. Could I get more clarity on that?
I'm happy to do that. So we in the past in Gearhart have had a problem with developers that had a parcel and would subdivide it, and then would subdivide those two parcels and subdivide those two parcels. And the planning commission couldn't do anything because this was not technically a subdivision. It was just a double division every year. And then it kind of looked like a subdivision, but it didn't meet any of our, we could not impose usual subdivision standards. And I know that the council has expressed a lot of frustration with that. What Carrie is suggesting would be, as I understand it, and Carrie and I have known each other long enough that she knows she can correct me if she thinks I'm wrong, is that the school is on one tax slaughter parcel. There's a second tax slaughter parcel. What I heard her say is that they will agree that that she proposes that a single family home would be allowed by right on the second parcel, but that if they were to do any other residential develop, so that would be the school. The school is one house because it's not a school anymore. It would be a house, and then a second house on the second parcel, and that prior to building any other or doing any other residential development, they would come back to the city with the type 3 application that would have all of those subdivision rules. So essentially creating a condition that would prevent this non-subdivision subdivision by dividing the parcels, once a year. So that's what I heard. Carrie, is that what you were saying?
Yes, with the caveat that I'm offering just the use of the elementary school as a house and no other houses.
Okay, so the elementary school will be the only house, and then it would require a type 3 to build anything else is the condition that
Any more houses.
any more housing. Okay, so you're not saying structures, you're saying housing.
I'm saying, right, we want to build a garage, which is the accessory to the single family residential house.
Okay, all right,
What
I
I'm
hear what you're
saying is
saying.
we won't build any more dwellings, so we won't generate any more traffic from new dwellings. We won't increase the septic load beyond one dwelling. We won't water demand. And so that's what I'm saying. So you won't have this, that would be the condition.
And then, do you know when you're going to have the septic data?
I think 2025.
All right, did everybody understand my explanation? Does anybody have additional questions regarding the condition that Carrie was proposing?
So Peter, does that, whatever you're calling it, condition or qualifier, does that carry through in the event of somebody buying it? To carry through with a new owner?
It would.
As long as staff remembers that that's the condition, and that we institutional memory is important, so we have to know about the condition. But it seems like people would remember this one.
Okay, do we have any more questions?
I want to clarify the septic study is done in 23 or 25?
I heard 25.
May I speak on this? Or do you want to?
Yes, if it's a short answer.
I'll stay out of it. The septic studies are ongoing, Russ. We have done 2 years of septic studies. We will make a determination when we get data and get analysis of the data later this summer. If we're gonna have to do something again, we have a thing separate with DEQ that they can't take our work if it's from a previous year. We have to have it current. So it depends on where we are on any zoning going on with the city and when we're submitting to DEQ to analyze a plan. Because we have to have a site plan for DEQ to look at. They analyze the site plan. They aren't analyzing, we'll have an idea of what the septic capacity is, but we have to give DEQ a short answer. Thanks, Gary.
Okay, Garrett, you wanted to say something? Did I see that?
Yeah, I wanted to
I'm sorry.
suggest that we ask a little more on regarding the condition, the proposed condition from Carrie, if you guys want to ask her what the approval criteria would look like for the type 3 review, if it would be more like the conditional use approval criteria or the zoning map amendment approval criteria, just so that you guys know what you'd be dealing with there, and the questions that would be applicable at that time.
Thank you.
We're good. I think we're good. We're good?
Good.
Judy and John, we're good? Yes, okay. At that point, I close public hearing. It is now time that the commissioners will discuss, and please for the audience, as much as you would like the input, it's for us to discuss. So I appreciate your respect, and you've done really great tonight, so I appreciate it. Don, you're first over there, and I usually start over there first.
Love it. I think there's a few items from the testimony today that, Mr. Moore himself said he doesn't know the answers yet. I think when he was describing it to me with some cottages and stuff like that and some open space, like that's kind of idyllic, I think, in some ways in my mind. But I would like to see that before we make a significant jump, I think, in a zone change. I think a zone change it's the biggest thing that we can do. And once we do it, we're not going back. And like Ms. Richter said, that the staff remembers, if the commission stays the same, if the owner stays the same, all those things kind of have to be happening in order for all of that to happen, the conditional use that happens, as far as I'm concerned. So until we have, I think, a viable plan and some more answers to it, questions like the septic and the wetlands and the subdivision and that kind of stuff, I would not be comfortable making a big change like that. And then secondly, regarding Matt Brown's testimony or his letter, section number 1, I think what he's noting and applying is the very first word in there, which is before an amendment to the text of the zoning ordinance is approved. It's the before part, not the later or maybe later or what have you. And so to me, this application seems incomplete, and it's not set before we make a change. That's all I have.
Thank you. Commissioner Graff?
First of all, the conditional thing that his lawyer said, I can't buy into that at all. If we agree to that, everything becomes a negotiation. And we have the lawyers already fighting over what the language would be. And I just wouldn't go that route. This is the way I see it. The people in Gearhart have spoken, and they are adamantly against this being rezoned tonight as R2. It's like they're manning the barricades. On the other hand, Bob has a piece of property he paid a lot of money for, and he has suggested that he wants to do what's best for Gearhart. And I hope these aren't two unretractable positions. The only way that I can see this move forward is for you to continue your due diligence, do your testing, do some outreach to the community so that you get what you want, the community gets what we want. We don't want this place to sit there with a fence around it into perpetuity. People are saying they want to have it a park, maybe a park, partial park, some housing or whatever. But until you come together with the community and do this together, nobody's going to be happy. There's no precedent in Gearhart that I'm aware of where we've ever taken public land and rezoned it to private land. But there is precedent when that was not done. When we first moved here like 27 years ago, there was a group of developers who wanted to build 38 condominiums along the first hole of the golf course. In order to do that, they would have had to change public to private. There was a huge outcry, and the city council voted it down. So there's precedent for us not to do this. Your property was public and now it's private, and you have a right to come before us and ask us to change the zoning. You have that right, but we also have the right not to do that. And the only way out of this mess for everybody is to come together and take you for your word. You know, you and I were talking back before you even bought it. And your pitch was, hey, you want this to be a park, you want ball fields, you want all this. But that changed. And I remember when you stood up at the 4th of July homeowners association on the meadow, and you made a short speech and you assured everybody that this wasn't going to be a profit center. And that to me is the only way out. My guess is I'm only one vote. This probably isn't going to pass tonight. And little free advice, you might withdraw your application, because if you don't and we deny it, you can't come back for a year. And I don't think you want to wait for a year, but that's just up to you. It's not fair to you, it's not fair to the people in the community. And if you really want this to be what's best for the community, it can happen. It really could. And people need to stop this, whatever's going on in Gearhart now. There isn't a person in this room, including you, that wouldn't like to turn left or right and see something beautiful there. And you can make money off of making stuff beautiful. That's my 2 cents worth. I am, to tell you, I am going to make a motion to deny. I am only one vote. I don't know whether there will be a second. But you're going about it wrong. Make us happy.
Thank you, Commissioner Grant. Sharon?
Okay, I looked at the comp plan first because that is of the utmost importance to me. It dictates the kind of community that I moved to and I want to continue to live in. And I think it's a genius plan. So the first thing that I read was to preserve the low density, semi-rural character of Gearhart. It's not residential character, it's rural character. And I don't think that an R2 zone is in keeping with that goal. Second goal in the comp plan is to conserve, preserve, and protect open space. Technically, this was not zoned open space. I get that, but this was used by the community as an open space. Third goal is to support tsunami preparedness. This goes under the tsunami hazard overlay zone findings. I would like to read those because even though technically you can do an R2 zone in a small event inundation zone, I want to read to you all what it says. It says the standards established by this section are intended to limit, direct, and encourage the development of land uses within areas subject to tsunami hazards in a manner that will, 1, reduce loss of life, 2, reduce damage to private and public property, 3, reduce social, emotional, economic disruptions, and 4, increase the ability of the community to respond and recover. I don't think that an R2 zone in a small tsunami inundation area is a responsible thing for the city to grant. absolutely not, given those parameters. Number 4 is to encourage further development of recreational facilities. That goes back to, gee, what happened to our recreational facilities that we were able to use. Number 5, maintain present residential density levels in established neighborhoods. Okay, this is not an established neighborhood, but the neighborhoods surrounding it, with the exception of the commercial, are R1. Even the RMCP, if I'm saying that correctly, the houses in to the north go along with the R1 density, okay? So putting an R2 surrounded by an R1 really does a disservice to all the R1 houses, I think. Number 6, increase strain on public services. As you know, we're down a lot of people. We only have 1 officer at this point, and we have 2 full-time firefighters, okay? That's the kind of city that we are at this point. So do we really think in our wildest dreams that we're gonna be able to support the potential of over 100 people moving into this area? Let me just read what was said in the findings. Sorry, on page 17. The findings say, fire chief and the public works director recommend the city obtain, no, that's not it. Basically, it's when they asked the police chief and Josh Como, they didn't indicate that they had any problems with it, but sorry, I'm trying to find. The findings said something about
Are you looking for developments, just add more to the already understaffed police department?
yes, thank you.
Can you read that, Jenny?
It's just going from the former chief of police, Jeff Goldman, talking about the police department being down, officers, and any and all developments just add more to an already understaffed police department. That was his statement.
Yes, thank you. That's what I was looking for. Number 7, wetlands protection. The city on the east side of Kershaw probably fell down a little bit on protection of the wetlands there. If the lot 800 is allowed to be developed, especially under an R2 scenario, things aren't going to go well. Yes, I know there's buffer. I know that it's been delineated. I get all that. But you know, if you've ever been around construction, you know that construction sites are not the cleanest, and then you've got people dumping pesticides on their lawns that goes into the wetlands. Number 8, I would just say the majority of public sentiment is a huge factor in our decision making. That's all I have to say.
Thank you. Russ?
Yes, well, I agree with a lot of what's been said. I basically think that the R2 is a problem for me. I would, if it's going to be housing, it should be R1. I also would like to see the septic. I know the septic evaluation can't be done until you have it plotted out for lots, but my experience has been, if it's plotted out R2, DEQ tries to facilitate the homeowner, the property owner, and make a system work. I mean, they have standards, but they also say, hey, you own this dirt, let's see if you can get a house and a septic on it somehow. So it's not necessarily to the benefit of the overall plot, 8 1/4 acres or whatever it is, to have higher density. I think I would, you know, if the park thing could be worked, Terry addressed it quite well. If there was some way the community could come together. Saving the school, I think is awesome in a certain way, even though it's a problematic structure to try to save. But it would be kind of cool 30 years, 50 years from now if that were there. But and I wasn't aware you suggested that the denial puts you at a disadvantage in terms of progressing. If you're correct, that's what I'm reiterating here.
Chad's correct.
Well, anyway, so I feel like there's still some waters, that the zone, that the request for R2 is inappropriate, that the water evaluation, the groundwater evaluation has to be completed to where we're more satisfied. That's all pretty low country throughout there. And anyway, that's what I have to say.
Thank you, Russ. Judy, do you have something to say?
I do. I agree with a lot of what I've heard others say, and I'm not going to repeat it all. I appreciate Sharon pointing out places in the comprehensive plan that are in conflict with this proposal, even though there are other places, according to our staff report, that seem to allow it. I have a question. If we don't approve the zone change, does that prevent Mr. Morey from continuing his work on the school?
No.
No. Okay.
Is that, do you have others? Is that?
No, I'm good.
You're good. Okay, John?
It's interesting. I came into the meeting with a very different set of expectations, but that's irrelevant at this point. I do appreciate Mr. Morey's intent, and I do appreciate the effort to improve the look of the property. My only concern, even though I do share most of the concerns of the rest of the planning commission as to the request to go with R2, my only concern is that if we turn this down, that his motivation to continue to maintain the property, maintain it well, to continue to beautify it, might not be there. So I go back to Terry's point and just encourage Mr. Morey to rethink. I think there's a lot of people who would support what you're trying to do if approached differently, and may even land you exactly where you want to be. But I think some more collaboration would help us get there. And I would encourage you to think about how to help us help you get to a goal where you really want to improve this property.
Anything else?
Nope.
Okay, my turn. I believe there's some grievous errors that have been made. You put in your own findings. I assume an accurate recounting of the April 15, 2022 meeting you have with Carol Connell, where she said, in order to have the zoning be for the applicant, we needed one, a city approved lot consolidation or subdivision replat of the site's current tax lot configuration. I don't see that. We need, she says under 2, a current vacant and buildable residential land inventory. In the findings, she quote the one from 2018, not the one that we have done from 2021, which I have here, and it says, they see in R2, they need, no, they actually say in R2 and R3, they need 8 additional multifamily units. We've added those since that report. The places that Kerry Johnson is building there on 101 next to the trader, and in changing, you've mentioned several times, changing the zoning on Pine Ridge, that had nothing to do with, it's not the same in the sense that that property was zoned R1 after the apartments were built. We were correcting an error that had been made in the 80s. But the other thing we have from that, John, was a very clear picture of what he intended to do, plus the consolidation of the tax lots there. But that was correcting an error. And as was said at our meeting last month, a decision we make in March does not set precedent for a decision that we make someplace down the road. Each request is looked at individually. As I go on here, you've done the specific wetland delineation, but her point number 5, and this is why your application was totally incomplete, a traffic impact analysis. As specified by GCO Article 4, Transportation Improvements in Access Management, based on the worst case impact scenario of the maximum density permitted by the R2 zone or other zone designation you request. It goes on for some other things, response to Gearhart Parks and Recreation Master Plan. You talked about wasn't included in the Parks Master Plan. What couldn't be included in the Parks Master Plan because it's private land. But I know that when that land was fenced, you took away 4 baseball fields from the Seaside kids. Anyone that has lived in Gearhart and had kids here, their kids were supported probably at some place along the line by Seaside kids. The basement, it's free for the kids to participate in sports. So now church on up 101 is putting in a baseball field, and they still are very short of baseball fields. If the information wasn't there, it was incomplete. Carol had that in April. I could see that you were working because we have reports from Ox and that. So what she requested should have applied today. Even though we changed, she is no longer with us. That's what she said you needed then. That is not housing at the entrance to Seaside. That is a hotel. It may be individual units, but it is short-term rentals hotels. So that doesn't even work into this. My problem is with it. It's an incomplete application. And that's what I have to say. So we've all had our say. Do we want to go ahead and make a motion?
May I clarify one issue?
Yes, sir.
Quickly, Terry, you and I spoke about the limitation of the application. I just want to read that. This is no application of a property owner or a local resident for an amendment to the text of this ordinance or zone boundary shall be considered by the planning commission within a 1-year period immediately following the previous denial of such request. Planning commission may permit a new application if, in the opinion of the planning commission, substantial new evidence or changed circumstances warrant reconsideration. Just want to make sure that was clear.
Okay.
I guess you not gonna withdraw.
Terry, excuse me, may I ask a question here?
You may ask a question.
And,
You're not
Terry, I'd
necessarily
like
responding.
Terry's input on this. The feedback we got is the body that dictates that one. I'm sorry, Terry. The body that dictates that 1 year, my understanding is the city council and not the planning commission in terms of us. I just want a clarification from my council and Peter.
I would interpret it the same way. So the way that, and I looked at this earlier today and I discussed it with Carrie, we're not in complete agreement, but we're in agreement on this point, that this is a recommendation of the planning commission that would automatically go to the city council for a decision unless it was withdrawn. So I don't believe that because the planning commission couldn't, I mean, you're making a recommendation rather than a decision. I think it would be the city council, and then I think the clock would start with the city council's decision if that decision was a rejection as well. And here's where Carrie and I differ. My interpretation would be that the 1-year clock wouldn't stop until there was final adjudication. So if there was an appeal of that decision by the city council in the event that the city council didn't approve, or if there was an appeal of the city council's approval by a opponent of the rezone, I don't think the 1-year clock would begin until final adjudication. Carrie does not agree with that. I understand her point, so I would want to get clarification from the city council on that code language as far as when that clock started.
And Peter, can I get some clarification on that real quick?
Yeah.
So this is not a decision?
This is a recommendation to the city council.
Okay.
So you're not able to decide whether to make a decision or not. You have to make a decision because we're on the clock. That what you're doing tonight is making a recommendation. So in the past, I have not interpreted recommendations, a non-binding recommendation, as a decision. Because let's say you approve this tonight, it would automatically go to the city council for review, regardless of the outcome. And they of course look at your reasoning and evidence, and that helps inform them, but they're the entity that makes the decision.
Thank you.
Yeah, and that's fine, Terry. I appreciate what you're saying, but I'm confused on it at the point. I understand that you make an opinion and then a recommendation.
We do not have the power to.
Yeah,
to make
then
action change.
we can apply to you, not wait a year. Is how I understand that.
We'll wait.
Or whatever.
We don't know.
Yeah.
We don't know.
We
And I want to remind everyone that any property that is rezoned, and we all know this, but I feel like I need to say it. The rezoning goes with property, not the person that applied for it. So whatever happens to that property in the future, if it's rezoned, it goes with property. Do I have anything else, or do I have a motion?
Make a motion to deny the application.
Okay. Commissioner Graff has made a motion to deny zone change. Do I have a second?
Second.
Commissioner Taggart has seconded. Do we have any further discussion? Having no further discussion, all those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Judy?
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. The recommendation is to deny the zone change. If everyone please see seated, we only have a few more things to take care of this evening. And I've lost my agenda, so it just, there I go. Okay. This is one year's worth of paper. Oh, no, it's only part of it. Okay, we don't have any unfinished business, any new business. Concerns of the commission, we had pre-ordinance and we'll discuss that in the May.
Yeah, I would just ask everybody to read through the two tree ordinances that were included in this paperwork.
Okay,
So we can look at them.
there's that. I will be gone in May, so Russ will be in charge of you lovely people. Do we have any questions for Peter? No? It is 8:48. Meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Garrett. Thank you, Garrett.
Not a big thing. I call that Keith Kane, that's the come over here, park your.
Thanks for hanging in.